welcome to the Islam Unravelled podcast. And, we connected actually through Temple Shalom and through Islam Unravelled, and met you representing at that time, I believe, Life After Hate.
Mm-hmm. Happy to be here.
Awesome. So, Tony, just from your perspective, because you have a unique perspective compared to many people in terms of being involved in white supremacist groups and kind of growing up and maybe choosing that ideology. And, just to get started for the folks that don't know your background, and just introduction to yourself and how you became radicalized in terms of certain viewpoints growing up that were white supremacist viewpoints, and then that journey of your life of how you came to different conclusions later in life. So please go ahead.
Sure. I wrote a whole book about it, but I'll condense it into 5 minutes.
The Cure for Hate. There you go. Buy it on Amazon.
So I grew up like any quote unquote normal kid did. I grew up on the west side of Vancouver in the Dunbar area. My family was middle class, upper middle class. My father was a psychiatrist. Went to private school and all of them. Things happen in childhood, and if you think about who you were when you came into the world, and think of who you were at the age of 3 or 4, and listeners, do that for yourself too. And I was Tony was this little bright, curious, mischievous, stubborn, defiant, really sensitive little boy, curious and open to the world. And life happens to us, and we learn maybe not to be so curious, not to be so open, and we put on armor and masks, and in order to feel safe, ultimately. And for brevity, I won't go into what happened in my childhood, but it left me very angry, confused, betrayed, and mistrustful of all of the authority figures in my life. And I went from listening to Queen and Elton John to The Clash and the Sex Pistols, and that
more aggressive punk music.
Angry,
yeah.
Right? That's what vibed with me. That's where I was resonating inside, and that took me to the punk scene. And in the punk scene, there was the skinhead scene. There was a subset of that, and I got into the skinhead scene, which wasn't racist at the time, but very quickly became so as it really started to go that way in England and in Europe. And my mom would always say to me, like, you can go to university, you can do any career you want to do. You've got all this opportunity in front of you. Why are you hanging out with those guys? Like guys that hadn't finished high school, and I thought about that, and the answer was, they had the one thing I didn't have, not toughness. I was a pretty soft kid, and I was beaten for not getting A's and B's at Vancouver College, and pretty repeatedly when I was in grade 6, when I was 11. And every time I was taken to the office and hit with that meter stick, I don't think even to this day I've ever felt as powerless as I did then. And to me, these guys had power, and it was power they exercised through violence.
And community and brotherhood.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's key to note that, because it's not really the ideology that draws people in. The ideology is like a pill you have to swallow in order to get those things like
belonging, acceptance,
and power.
And power.
I got attention when I felt invisible. I got acceptance when I felt lovable, and I got power when I felt powerless. And the more I got involved, the more people were afraid of us, and the more people were afraid of me, not because of me, because of the people
what you represented gave a level of fear and respect and power because of your association and what you represented.
Absolutely. If someone would see you and then go to the other side of the street to avoid you, there's a sense of power in that. Yeah. If someone's going to run away from you, and you run into a room, there's a sense of power in that. It's not real power. It's the illusion of power. I should correct. But coming from that deficit of that feeling of powerlessness, it was intoxicating. I'm like, oh, I feel powerful now. I feel safe. You know, it was it doesn't make any sense. Like, I'm going to go be safe by hanging out with a bunch of skinheads,
Yeah,
and getting into fights every weekend.
but you belonged, you were accepted, and you had a brotherhood.
I had a brotherhood, and well, they had the toughness. I was probably the most educated. I'm not going to say smarter, because some of them were pretty bright. I was the most educated of that group, and I was intellectually like a big fish in a small pond. But you know, if we were going to fight, you know, those guys would do it. If we were going to talk or have an argument, that was my role. And I quickly got into a leadership position, and became a spokesman with newspapers and TV stations and things like that.
And you found your role in the brotherhood a valued role.
Absolutely. And I got, you know, my father, having been a psychiatrist, was working 60, 70, 80 hours a week. And when I was growing up, and often I was in bed before he came home from work. And his way, and I know he loved us very much, but his way of showing love was to be a great provider. As a little boy,
but not so much physical love and affection.
Right. The attention and affection
and time
weren't there. So, there was always a part of me that was attention seeking, and I was able to get that in spades doing what I was doing. I got all kinds of national attention.
And in that journey, because high school, like in one of our interviews with one of the members of our Muslim community, talking about an identity crisis, that's what he had, because he was growing up here and he just wanted to belong again. Mm-hmm. Same. And with this kind of crisis where your parents have an expectation of you that you have a clear success, but this brotherhood and this identity and this power, that it propelled you to do things that maybe if you were never with this group, you would never have done.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, and you know, when we go to fill those deficits, and those deficits, you know, we get they're born of toxic shame. You know, so a lot of it is shame driven, and shame is the byproduct of trauma.
Yeah.
But you can have shame without trauma.
Yeah.
Without physical or sexual trauma, emotional trauma.
Yeah.
So it's very. When we have those deficits, we will seek to cure them, right? And if I didn't find my way into skinheads, we either seek to project them onto other people, or mask them, hide them. You know, shame is the dirty secret we keep from ourselves.
Yeah.
And so John Bradshaw has written a great book on shame called "Healing the Shame That Binds Us." He wrote it a while ago, but he was an addictions guy. And, you know, shame is the root of all addiction.
Wow.
And
shame is the root of all addiction.
Yeah.
Wow. That's a powerful, that's actually a powerful distinction.
Yeah. And it's the root of violence.
Yeah.
So, you know, I talk about shame as, shame is the alienation of the self. You know, we look at ourselves in the mirror, when we see someone is too heavy, too skinny, not pretty enough. We don't feel loved. We don't feel lovable. We're less than. It's the feeling of being less than human. It's an internal dehumanization.
Yeah.
And so one way that we make ourselves better with that is we put that dehumanization on others.
Us and them.
Us and them.
Yeah.
You know, what goes on outside of us is a mirror of what goes on inside of us, and vice versa. And we project our dehumanization onto other people. You know, what's a word that's the opposite of shame?
Pride.
Right. And in some cultures, it's honor.
Honor, sure.
Proud Boys.
Yeah.
I'm proud of my race.
Yeah.
White pride worldwide.
Yeah.
They're sort of mirror opposites. It's I'm going to go into a hyper version of this to hide what I'm feeling inside, which actually I feel less than.
Sure.
And I adopted an ideology that told me I was greater than. And that also justified the use of violence toward expressing toxic shame.
And meaning other people from different religions, different races. And so maybe in that ideology, like races or color of skin or religions that were, let's say, part of the group that you're with. And what was the background of the group? Was there a specific name that the group had?
There were just skinheads.
Yeah.
And I was chuckling when you sent me the text, and the very first skinhead organization that I started was called Vanguard Skins.
Yeah.
We were the Guard of Vancouver.
Yeah.
Like 19-year-old
yeah.
punks all full of
in the 1980s.
The
yeah.
1980s.
It was definitely more white in the 1980s. So you guys were right. So now, just in terms of like, now when ideology goes into violence, right? So one thing is to talk about it, one thing is to think about it, but now taking that action where the thought discussion becomes violence. Do you remember like how you kind of, normally people don't want to hurt anybody else and they don't want to be hurt themselves, but to go to that point where we're now let's hurt somebody because we don't like their belief or the color of their skin.
Yeah, first you have to get comfortable hurting people.
Yeah,
for any
sure.
reason. So,
sure.
Skinheads, when we were completely disorganized and heavily drinking, and identifying with football hooligans and Clockwork Orange,
Yeah.
we used to walk around with bowler hats and canes.
Really, like the Clockwork Orange guys. Like
we were life imitating art.
Wow.
There's a reason they banned that film.
Yeah, no kidding.
So, I remember the very first fight I got in as an adult. I was probably 17, 18, but the only other fights had been a handful of fights in the schoolyard.
Just pushing and shoving.
Yeah, punching it. But, and remember we were at this party and we tried to go in the party and they wouldn't let us in and they pushed us out, and then people came out and, challenged us, and me and my friend got in a fight with two other guys, and that was my first taste of violence, and we won. Not because I had to think about what I'm gonna to these other guys. They didn't even have to think about it. They just went, and it was they're so practiced at it, it came naturally to them, and
instinct and no hesitation.
Yeah, and some of them had experienced an awful lot of violence as a child, and so it came, the anger, everything. We just needed. It was anger looking for an excuse, an outlet, somebody's
color, their skin, their religion.
Well, at this point, it wasn't that. It was just somebody
that you didn't like.
He didn't want us to go in the party. That's enough. He looked at me the wrong way. That's enough. He disrespected me.
Yeah.
But afterwards, the adrenaline rush. I was buzzing with adrenaline for half an hour afterwards, and excitement, and the rush and the feeling of power, and it was like,
and aliveness,
and it was almost like having sex for the first time. It was just like, oh, this is amazing, right? And I got addicted to that feeling, and that sense of power over others, and it didn't matter if I won a fight, because I became competent. I was never a good fighter.
Yeah.
But I'd often get into fights I had no chance of winning, but just it's an interesting way to self-harm as well. That's the other half of shame. That which we don't put onto other people, we put on ourselves.
Yeah.
That brings us back to addiction, stuff like that. But each time I got into a fight, it became easier. And the justification, the thing that the made up transgression that was, okay, he's crossed the line of transgressions. Now I can justify to myself moving to violence. That got lower every time.
Yeah.
Till in the end, and I felt sense of guilt, and I felt, yeah, this is wrong, or that person didn't deserve what they just got. But you stuff those down, and you put them away so you don't have to feel them. And I found in the end, after a while, I didn't feel it anymore. And violence became very easy.
And in those 1980s, like actual violence, like more common. Like there was pre-internet days, so it was everyone.
Forget pre-internet days. They wouldn't have cared so much about the internet.
Yeah.
No, and nobody had a phone.
Yeah.
Right.
So no distractions.
Cameras,
no distractions.
No cameras.
Yeah.
Like you could have a fight in
Nobody
front of a
would ever
house
know.
party and nobody has any evidence.
Yeah. No social media, nothing. It was just, yeah. And so now there's academic ideology like David Duke and very articulate, very how he presents it, but from a racialized standpoint, that maybe the psychology, to talk about the psychology, because a lot of times in our kind of work with multiple communities, multiple religions, it seemed bar none, every group, no matter how mainstream they, at least I perceive them to be, everyone felt that they were the persecuted ones. Like
absolutely,
everyone feels like they're persecuted. Everyone's out to get them.
There's a sense of a grievance.
Yeah,
and
everyone shares that grievance.
Yeah, it just has a different wrapper on it.
Exactly,
it's the same thing, and there's always somebody over there is trying to take something from you.
Exactly, and we got to band together to combat that external threat.
Yeah, and so if we look at it, and you need the more sophisticated problem that I would call David Duke sophisticated, but compared to how we talked about things as in the early days of Skinhead, it was sophisticated.
Yeah,
books written them.
Yeah,
you need that intellectual framework around that to build. If you want to build a movement, you've got to have that.
You got to have those pieces.
You got to have those pieces. And I just lost my train of thought.
Well, we were going into like how the grievance exactly.
So what we, in a nutshell, what we believed was, if you looked at the white race the same way that we look at a species, and you look at, what has to happen to a population in nature before it gets declared an endangered species, you could make the argument, we tried to make the argument that, well, that's happening to white people. They're shrinking habitat. They're competing for less and less resources, declining birth rates.
The melting pot.
Or Jews that are trying to swamp us with immigration.
Interracial marriages and relationships kind of diluting.
They're coming for our jobs. They're coming from our women. They're coming for our civilization.
Yeah.
And that once you can buy into that, then if it's a matter of existential crisis, there's no limit to what a response can be to prevent that from happening. If you can instill the belief in someone that the white race is facing extinction, in 200 years there'll be no white people left, or whatever nonsense you extrapolate, and it was made worse. It was made worse in especially in the United States. I think the 2001 census for the first time predicted the turning point where there would be a non-white majority in the United States. So you could say 2050 or something like that. And England did the same thing.
And with the birth rates of other faiths and races increasing and declining birth rates of Caucasian countries, you could make a mathematical ratio as to, hey,
you could project when the year it was going to happen, and then you can say to someone, by 2050 it's all over. We will become disenfranchised in our own country, that we stole from the First Nations people.
Sure. And you brought up 2001. So one seminal event is September 11th. So extremists from a Muslim background. And so one analogy one of our scholars made is extremists needs extremists. So white extremists will need to point to the extremist of another community to justify grievances. And then somehow every group wants to say that extreme view of the other group somehow represents the majority, which is not true. But the extremists are the tiny, tiny minority, but they're trying to paint the picture that as if they speak for everybody, the silent majority, like that we speak, actually our views are the majority. And now getting to current events, the election just happened. Joe Biden won. According to the electoral college, the popular vote, et cetera, but a huge amount of people came out for Donald Trump, like a large number of people that
more than last time, significantly more than last time.
Very loyal followers. Again, you have groups like QAnon, you've got the Proud Boys, the Boogaloo, so a lot of support. So Trump's, I think his legacy will be to show that I think we all grew up with more of a liberal leaning media, which was CNN and kind of all the three major networks were more of a liberal kind of viewpoint. But I think with Fox News, with Trump, to show that the sentiment, there's a sentiment that is almost half of North American society has certain viewpoints that aren't what the liberal media would say is mainstream. So he's kind of illustrated that there is a very clear divide in terms of people's beliefs and their view world. He's a showman. He's charismatic. He's he has mobilized people. He is more, I would say, compared to any other president, definitely with all the scandals, whether it's coronavirus deaths, whether, various kind of things, there's so many to point to.
He's the John Gotti of politics.
And exactly, the Teflon Don. And so just speaking to that, because now this is current events, we're 2020, and Trump still is a powerful man, even though he's been, he's got a support. People, they may not necessarily be like, they are Republican, but they're Trump loyalists. And I think that's kind of.
I think you're absolutely right there. They're loyal to Trump. So,
yeah.
A more mainstream Republican, the
Mitt
Republican,
Romney.
Mitt Romney can't come and say, okay, I'm going to go for president and you're going to jump behind me.
Yeah.
That's whoever.
He was trying more centrist. He had more of a centrist kind of compared to how Trump did it.
Yeah. And was soundly rejected.
Yeah.
And with the electorate. And,
yeah.
The fascinating thing about this last election was the size of vote that Donald Trump got from people of color.
Yeah.
I think he, low baseline, but I think he increased the number of Black voters by 50%. I think 28% of, I read, LGBT people voted for him.
Wow.
The Latino vote was in the 30s.
Wow.
Actually, the place where he did lose votes was white people.
Like Arizona. Arizona.
So it's I need to do a whole show on why that is, and I don't want to digress, but there's clearly an attempt to expand that populism beyond his base,
and with specifically the white community, because one thing you mentioned, pride. So Trump doesn't apologize for anything, no matter how blatant a mistake or scandal or whatever it is. He's not apologetic. He has a prideful, boastful nature. So one thing you'll never see him do is apologize for anything. So I think maybe from a racial standpoint, from the race standpoint, here's a leader that represents our community that has a level of pride and doesn't apologize, doesn't back down, even in the face of legitimate criticism.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is going to sound crazy, a level of authenticity. And when I mean authenticity, is he doesn't try to be anything else than who he is.
And he's not trying to appease everyone at the same time.
No, this is who I am. You get what you get. You know what I mean?
Whereas other politicians, they're always trying to, you can see them, they're trying to appease everybody at the same time, and they wind up upsetting everybody, whereas he doesn't play that game. He just kind of.
And it reminds me of the phenomenon of Rob Ford.
Yeah.
Right? You go, how is this guy popular? How is he getting the vote? And he's filmed smoking crack and all these things, and people still love him.
Yeah.
Because he was authentic. He is who he was. And I think I think that people today are craving authenticity.
Yeah.
And
they can sense, I think with Obama, in the beginning, the hope, the change, his very articulate, well-spoken speeches that when you see the result, that was expected didn't quite happen. And then it just kind of seemed like whatever happened during that presidency resulted in a wholehearted support for someone like Trump.
Yeah, and so it's understanding, and I mean, you can do a whole episode on the social dynamics and crowds and what people respond to, and what people respond to doesn't always make sense. It doesn't always make logical sense.
Yeah,
it's a very, but it's a phenomenon that we should study. So it doesn't keep happening. And I think populism is on the rise globally. I think as faith in the world order and the way economies have been run for decades, people feel that it's failed them. I think populism is an essential part to democracy. And for me, it's like the engine light coming on in your car. When populism shows up, it's telling you there's something systemically wrong, that you need to fix it. You need to fix the inequality that's happening. You need to fix these different things. And just like the engine light in your car, if you ignore it, you ignore it at your own peril. You know, your engine can seize. You can have, the car will break down. And so populism almost never delivers the right solutions, but it often asks the right questions.
And will you say, like we talked about this earlier, was with the algorithms on the big social media companies, Google, Facebook, Twitter, what happens is the algorithms are basically trying to keep your attention on the social media, and our time is monetized by the big tech companies. The more we are looking at our phones to content that we like. So if it's white supremacist related content that is keeping us engaged with these social media platforms, or if it's Muslim content or Black community content or First Nations content, the algorithms will just keep feeding our viewpoint. So we don't necessarily look at other viewpoints, but it just reinforces our bias, reinforces our viewpoint. The tech companies themselves, they're just trying to keep us. We are the product. Our attention is the product. So whatever it takes to keep us there, liberal, conservative, extreme, whatever the case may be, keep that attention. And I think that's the dilemma, the social dilemma. Is one, they're a business, they have quarterly reports, annual reports, they have earnings and profits, and we are the product, our attention.
Yeah.
And that's creating populism, because now people are like, hey, I believe in the flat earth thing. I believe in Pizzagate. I believe there's a group of pedophiles that are in the Democratic Party. So that people are believing things so.
You believe that too?
but you the beliefs are becoming more entrenched.
Yeah, and look, when I started, I was part of the generation of the white supremacist movement that ushered in the internet age. I built one of the very first white supremacist websites in 1994, 95 for Resistance Records, a white power record label.
Yeah.
So before then, and this is how technology hasn't created the problem. It just magnifies it or enhances the ability for it to grow. It speeds things up. That's what technology does, speeds things up.
And connects you with more and more people, like potentially hundreds of thousands, millions of people that share your viewpoint.
Yeah, so there's two levels. There's the sort of the internet and the technology, and then there's social media. So when I started, if you wanted to go to a meeting, you'd see a sticker somewhere and you'd have to go, and there'd be protesters outside and, people with cameras, and the barrier to getting involved.
To getting any media coverage was...
Well, not getting media coverage. If you were I'm going to my very first meeting.
Yeah.
Well, there's TV cameras outside. Well, I don't want to be on camera. Like, there's protesters. I'm going to get my head caved in. There's all these different reasons why you wouldn't. There's probably an undercover police officer in there and paying attention to who's there. So it was a very non-anonymous affair. And so you'd send away for a book, and you'd have to mail order it, right, and send a check somewhere in the States, and
wait for it to come.
Yeah, and it might take 4 to 6 weeks, to come, and then it's got to make it through Canada Customs and slide through, because they have a banned book list, and then you watch it or read it or whatever, and then go send off for another one. And so
you had to work harder.
Yeah. So the process of radicalization happened over months and years.
Yeah.
What the internet's done is you can now binge watch an ideology in a weekend.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. It's weeks and months.
Yeah.
So the Dylan Roof started with, black on white crime.
Yeah.
And then just rabbit hole from there with the algorithm, and
Yeah.
the algorithm's agnostic.
Yeah.
The algorithm doesn't care what it is you look at,
as long as it keeps you there. And whatever keeps you there, that ideology, that video is keeping you there. The algorithm's going to just serve up more similar.
Yeah. Yeah. And then the other piece is the social element. So, and so there's two main parts of the movement. There's your thuggish, clubs and helmets and shields and going fighting in the streets part of the movement. And then you've got the 4chan, 8chan, the really nerdy, bright computer geeks that there. And Charlottesville was the first time the two groups were in the same place at the same time. And you could see in some of the footage, some people are right into the violence and some people are freaked out. They've never, half the group is used to it and looks forward to it. And the other half, violence has been fantasy, and now they're faced with it, 6 inches from their face. And it's, there's a lot of people dropped out of the movement because of the violence at Charlottesville. There's always people dropping out of the movement. It's got a huge churn rate, whatever type of group it is. So the nerdy kid that was maybe, sitting in his mom's basement, playing computer games, but isolated. Now there's hundreds of thousands of nerdy kids just like him that are, angry and pissed off, and now they're connected with other people who, whether it be women or whether it be Islam or whether it be
incel.
Yeah, no, it's and now you find community in your grievance in such a way that was very difficult before.
And what changed for you? Because now you've evolved. You've gone from one singular viewpoint of the world, your tribalism, your brotherhood, and then the catalyst for change, and then to start to meet people in communities that you hated or you enacted violence against. So that in those days, the pre-internet days, like to have that change, whatever that catalyst was, and if you'd like to go into that catalyst, and then how your viewpoint changed when you started to engage other communities.
Sure. And I'll, to put it briefly, I was 22, 23 when I found myself in the delivery room, and this beautiful little baby girl gets handed to me, and I think I'm going to drop her or something like that. I'm just, what do I do? And I had a son born 15 months later.
So you're a new dad as a young man.
Yeah, new dad. They became my tribe.
And your priority.
Yeah. And, I was a complete narcissist.
Yeah.
I had my head so far up my ego, it wasn't funny. And while I did get that sense of community, that and belonging in the group, it was so dysfunctional. The people that were there, every relationship was abusive, and it takes a lot of energy, and it's exhausting to be that angry and pissed off all the time.
Yeah,
and to surround yourself with angry, pissed off people, it's.
You told me a story, and I think I tell the story that somebody who'd been in maybe in his been doing like the gangs and the skinhead ideology for decades, and you can see it kind of ate him away from inside. The compounded hate, month after month, year after year, decade after decade, took a physical toll on that person. I keep thinking about it, and so people that invested so much of their energy and their psychology in hating other people took a physical toll on them.
Exactly. It's a great person, and that's why, again, I said the movement churns through people.
Yeah, but they're diehards too.
But they're absolutely diehards, but not as many as you would think.
Yeah,
and there's people in leadership position like Tom Metzger, who passed away this week, and I worked closely with. They'll do it their entire lifetime, but then they're getting the attention, and they're getting their needs in that met. But for other people, some age out, or mature out. Life After Hate, we've helped a ton of people leave through.
How is Life After Hate created? Like, how did that come together?
Well, it really came together at the Summit Against Violent Extremism in 2011 in Dublin. And we were people that managed to get ourselves out, and we wanted to, and that conference was put on by Google, Google Ideas, their think tank, and it was remarkable. It was a remarkable summit. You had to be a former, so you had to be working towards peace. So it wasn't from active groups. But there was about 50 people. I mean, there was, skinheads and that as such, but there was gangs, Bloods, Crips, MS-13, and then there was guys who were in the Mujahideen that were involved in a number of different terrorist groups, and then fought in Afghanistan, or were involved in England and different extremist groups, Red Brigade, you name it. It transcended
every race, religion,
class, gender, geography, all of those things they put in the room, and it was and then it also included the 30 victims and survivors of terrorism, because I think it's critically important that their voice is so important. The people that are harmed by terrorism to be involved in any discussion. And what I started to hear was, and it really was, an imam, a rabbi, and a skinhead walk into a bar.
Yeah.
The imam's not going to drink, obviously, but it was, we'd go and socialize, and the most unlikeliest.
And was this one of the first times you had this kind of diverse kind of connection? Yeah.
And I've maintained that, those connections
and relationships, friendships,
and relationships from that, and started to hear over and over and over again, what got you out, and it was the birth of a child that came up over and over and over again. And I'm going to say anecdotally, a female child. I think that something about that protecting and that female energy in that hypermasculine space
brings out that affection and that kind of nurturing side that may have not been dormant up until that point.
Right. And I keep saying this, not that I'm saying that should have a fertility program for white nationalists
or any extremists,
or any extremists. And then the other one was that happened over and over and over again, was the receiving compassion from someone who they felt they didn't deserve it, when they least deserved it, particularly if that person came from a community that they had dehumanized. It was incredibly powerful event. And I preface that by saying, I'm not saying for a second it's the responsibility of marginalized or oppressed communities to go and hug a Nazi, or anything like that. But it's an incredibly powerful gift should you choose to give it.
And you and I, we met at Temple Shalom, and I think Rabbi Dan Muskovitz had organized a talk where you gave a talk, and you have a history with that temple, that synagogue in Vancouver.
Yeah, 30 years earlier, that was the place where I did my very first act of anti-Semitic vandalism, putting a National Front sticker on the front door of that particular synagogue.
And the National Front is an extreme right-wing white nationalist group from the UK.
Yeah, I think they're defunct now, but the British National Party.
In the 80s, they were big.
Yeah. and so there's leaving the movement behind. That's often referred to in academia as disengagement. It's a good start. It's not the end point, and I'd done that. The next phase for me was then, again, another academic term, I'm not fond of, de-radicalization. And that's really where I did the healing work, to deal with the toxic shame and the traumas that created the vulnerabilities that had the illusion of being soothed in the white supremacist movement. And so over the next, that's a continuous, journey. Over the next while, I did probably 1,000 hours of one-on-one and group counseling, dealing with my stuff, and then being around other people dealing with their stuff, and understanding we all have stuff and we all deal with it in different ways. And
I met one of your coaches, Dov Barron, and Dov is of a Jewish background.
Right.
And tell me about how you met him and how he influenced a lot of your kind of change process.
Yeah, and he was my healer.
Yeah.
And I'd started working with Dov. I became a financial advisor in 2004. In 2005, I was having a lot of early success and doing personal growth workshops and hiding from my past. It's funny, if you type Tony McAleer into Google, you get a different result than if you type Anthony McAleer, which is on my birth certificate. So
yeah,
that's how I was dealing with my past. I was running away from it. And did these personal growth workshops and getting out of your own way and dealing with ego and stuff like that. And each time I did one, I could see relationships improving. All kinds of cool stuff was happening from doing these workshops. So I kept doing them. And the guy that introduced me to Dov, his workshops, about 8 months later, he hands me an envelope for my birthday. He goes, "Here, open it up. It's a gift certificate. It's a gift certificate for one-on-one counseling with Dov." Like,
nice.
Great. Who doesn't want therapy for their birthday?
Yeah.
So I went and sat down with Dov, and Dov's about 10 years older than me. I'm from, Liverpool. He's from Manchester, and we like Benny Hill and
yeah,
and Monty Python and
so you guys bonded.
Yeah, we bonded, and we bonded and had a lot of good laughs together. So I've known him now for about a year, and I sit down in his office, and and I tell him about why I'm angry at my dad, why I'm angry at my mom, and
angry at other races.
I haven't even gone there. I've known him for a year, and he didn't know about my past.
Yeah.
And I'm telling him all that stuff, and then I stop and I'm like, do I tell him the rest? And this was a relationship that I valued. He'd already done some healing for me. And
did you know he was from the Jewish background?
No.
You didn't know? Okay.
No, I didn't know.
Yeah.
And so what generally happened when people found out about my past, it was the end of the relationship, and often the end of an entire social group. So I feared losing this one. And I'm looking, around the room, and I'm staring, maybe the carpet's got an answer to it. And he's like, "Mate, just let it out. It's okay. It's safe here." And I'm humming and hawing. He's like, "Mate, you look like you got 3 golf balls in you. So whatever it is, just spit it out." So out it comes, and that's vulnerability, and we don't want to be vulnerable because we fear the repercussions of it. And I took that step of vulnerability and just threw the dice and blurted it all out, and skinhead, neo-Nazi, Holocaust denier, all of these things. And the more I'm telling him, the more he starts smiling. The more he starts smiling, the more I start getting irritated. And he's sitting there with a big grin on his face. I'm like, "Well, what's so funny? Like, I don't get it." And he leans in with a big grin and he goes, "I'm Jewish, right?" I'm like, Of course he did. And I sunk back into the chair in shame. I could feel it in my chest and my cheeks. And here's this man who loves me, wants to heal me, wants to see the best for me and my family. And here I am, sinking into the chair, knowing the fact that I'd advocated for the annihilation of him and his people. And he said, "That's what you did. That's not who you are."
That's what you did, not who you are.
Yeah. I said, "I see you. I see little Tony." And the waterworks all started, and that was the beginning of, we hugged, and that was the beginning of a very powerful journey. And he said, "You're going to go public with this story, and you're going to have a big impact." And I said, Sure, but just not right now. I'm in this budding financial career. I don't want to go on TV and blow that up. So it was like later. And it was 6 years later by the time I went public
to talk about your story, which
to talk
again,
about the story.
Like being in business, you don't necessarily want to identify with a group that mainstream. In business, you don't want to be regarded as an extremist or a racist, but you wound up again being engaged with communities that you originally hated, and that engagement, and then prompting your public work, which to talk to the public about your story. And then, because I think there's so much curiosity about white supremacy and this whole, and I think a lot of intelligence agencies are saying more than any other group, it is the white supremacist groups that are becoming a real danger to society compared to any other group at the moment. So with your journey, you're basically coming into a time where the internet, the algorithms, people's viewpoints and racial divides are at a probably much higher than they've been in a long time. So you're at a critical juncture to provide some insight as to the psychology. And then from somebody who's been there and transitioned, started to engage communities that you hated, and now you have a broader perspective, and I would imagine a completely different worldview.
Absolutely. And the thing I realized in that office that day was if he could love me, then maybe I could learn to love myself.
Wow.
And and embarking on that journey, which can seem really scary when you go into the basement of your subconscious and start opening up boxes that you buried. It's not a pleasant journey. It's not a difficult one either, but it requires courage. Everyone can do it. All they need is that bit of courage and somebody to provide the safe space for the vulnerability, and obviously, the counseling skills and such. And then, so once I dealt with my stuff and I'd understood my own pain and how my wounds had basically kept my future, my past had kept my future in a headlock, and once I was able to move beyond that and had an understanding of that in others, it changed the way that nobody intellectually dissuaded me out of the movement. The battle wasn't fought in the head, and it isn't fought in the head. The battle is in the heart. And I was completely cut off from my heart. I was operating from ego and narcissism and all of those things. And the ego was driving the bus, and the ego should never be allowed to drive the bus. It can sit in the back seat and chirp away all at once. The heart should always be driving the bus.
Yeah.
When the ego is driving a bus, it has no guidance system. If no maps, no GPS, you just end up in weird and strange places. And
we talk about the opposite of hate. So there's love, but then there's a compassion and empathy and understanding, whereas hate doesn't want to understand, doesn't want to do compassion. It just wants to hate and blame and shame, and then to go into a new energy, a new space of empathy and compassion and engagement to people and vulnerability to groups like that you perpetrated acts of violence against.
Yeah, and when we're compassionate with people, when we're compassionate with someone, we hold a mirror up and allow them to see their humanity reflected back at them when they can't see it on their own.
Yeah,
that's what Dob did for me.
Yeah,
he held the mirror up and said, "I see you. This is what I see.
Who you were, not who you are.
Little Tony."
Yeah.
You know, that little 4-year-old. That's why I asked you to have your listeners listen to it, because that core essence is always there. It never leaves us. That's who we are.
Yeah.
And we can always learn to go back and reconnect with that little boy or girl.
And with society now, because now with racial polarization at record levels, and again, how you and I connected is engagement, physically meeting people. Like the online spaces, easily you can dehumanize other people because it's online.
There's no consequence.
There's no consequence.
There's anonymity.
But face to face, going to a temple, going to a different racial group and meeting them, breaking bread, and just like that conference that you went to meet people and the demon that people think in their minds when they're actually breaking bread and talking to the people that represent different groups, it's not what they thought it was.
No, and the purpose is yes, to go and meet groups, but to go back and attempt to heal the harm and the damage that I've done in those communities, in that temple specifically.
Yeah.
That's there's a spiritual aspect to this journey that I've taken, but there's going and holding myself accountable for the wrongs that I've did. And I've gone to the gay community, to the Jewish community. We've gone to these different communities. It's a lifelong.
And by doing so, because I was there at your talk, and it was well attended. A lot of people were there in Temple Shalom, and it was like going from the group was compassionate, the group was positive, the group was accepting and forgiving, which again, because you're physically there, right? You're there. You're not hiding behind the keyboard. You're there to tell your story and meet folks.
and feel that compassion, to be in the same room with it, the feel that energy of compassion that gets missed when we're just looking at characters on a screen. You know, they say there's only 7% of what we communicate is the words we use. The other 93% is body language, tone, and all these different energy, or all these different things. So everybody's, young people like to text all the time, and they don't even like talking,
Exactly.
But you miss so much.
Meeting people. And even there's multiple studies where people had a preconceived bias and they had a preconceived prejudice, and multiple tests that by physically meeting that person from that race or religion reduced that racial animus or prejudice by minimum 50%, 60, 70, even 80% by meeting somebody from that group. And in our groups, like, when we did our engagements where we went to synagogues, went to churches, mosques, and had kind of groups going back and forth, youth groups, elder groups, the scholars. And one thing we realized is a lot of people, at least for the Muslim community, they said, "Oh, we've never met a Muslim before." I was like, "Really? Like, there's 100,000 Muslims in the Lower Mainland. You never met a Muslim before?" But then I met people in our Muslim community. They said, "Oh, we've never met Jewish people before." And then I went to churches, which were near highly attended mosques. And they said, "Oh, we've never met Muslims before." Like, physically met them. Like, we've heard about them. And it's like when we would go into these this interfaith exchange, where we would go to these various places of worship and just be as friends and neighbors and kind of meet the community, there was a buzz. The Muslims are here. So it was like, but I think people appreciated the opportunity to speak. And then I remember one place we went to, and we said, "Hey, we'd like for you to visit our mosque." And they're, "Really? We could." It's like, "I'm afraid to come." It's like, it's 4 walls. It's pretty basic. You'll be welcome. And so we had, where members of the Jewish community came to the mosque, Christian community, youth groups came to the mosque, and just open Q&A. Like, what do you have in your mind about our community, and vice versa? And I think that just in its microcosm of meeting people and feeling that compassion and giving compassion, breaking bread breaks down the walls more than lectures and articles. Just meeting and breaking bread, I think, is very powerful. And what you would do, you would physically go, and you've been to many conferences, you've kind of reached out to many groups, like you said, to not only be a means of public healing for others, but for yourself.
Absolutely. It's Whenever I sign my book, there's a line I put in there, and is heal the self, heal the world.
Yeah.
And in those meetings, your interfaith meetings, there's three important things that are present for those things to happen. Number one is courage. You have to step into the unknown and meet people that. The second one is compassion. You're going there to see the humanity in others, and the third one is curiosity. And I think those curiosity, compassion, and courage, when we can live our lives, with those three values operating, it changes everything. When we can be curious about the other, when we can see the human in the other, and have the courage to forge relationships with the other, powerful things can happen. And I talk about, and sort of healing the self and healing the world. I spent 15 years in that movement, trying to change the world outside of me.
Yeah.
To no avail. And what I realized in this my own personal journey of healing is that by healing myself, I have more ability to change the world around me by changing who I am in the world. So if you want to change the world out there, change in here. Who you choose to be in every moment of every day, who you choose to be in every action which inspires another human being has tremendous power to change the world. But if we don't change ourselves and just expect everything out there to change, there's just going to be a lot of anger and frustration. We can see it. There's no shortage of that.
And for you wrote your book, The Cure for Hate, and you've helped found organizations like Life After Hate. You've traveled many parts of the United States, Canada, and Europe to talk about this issue. And this issue, it's not going away.
No.
Racialized polarization, prejudice, it's getting, from what I can see, worse and worse. And for your engagement, because you've seen the spectrum, you've been through the spectrum, and by you, again, me coming from a Muslim community, and just speaking on that to an extent from certain white supremacist communities about Muslims and Islam, there is this kind of fear, this bias. In some engagements we've heard, there's this fear that Muslims have this hidden agenda to implement Sharia law in North America. Crackpot ideas that Muslims somehow force female genital mutilation, which is a categorical falsehood, nothing to do with the faith, but somehow it's almost like fake news that becomes like some sort of accepted fact among certain communities, which are outright falsehoods, but they're just perpetrated so much that a broad spectrum of people start to believe them. So from the fact that the Muslim community in Canada is maybe, I would say 2 million, give or take. So out of 35 million or so, in the United States, maybe 6 million or so. So a minority in terms of, so there is an argument. A lot of folks have not met Muslims before because the ratios and the numbers show that. But in your view, those that have never encountered Muslims or Muslim communities, but they have these prejudicial views, what are your thoughts? Like what is the, from what you've seen and heard, what is the biggest thing? Obviously, terrorism is somehow a painted brush to 2 billion people, when it's just like maybe a couple of dozen, maybe 100 people, just a small fraction of these extremist groups that exist in every community. And again, mental health is not exclusive to one religion or race.
No.
And extremism is not limited to one race or religion, but somehow the extremists, like we talked about earlier, there is a perception in some communities about Muslims and Islam that is very negative, and it helps enforce a racial bias of us and them.
Yeah, I always refer to those extremists as ISIS or Al-Qaeda inspired.
Yeah.
I never attach Islam or Muslim to it.
Yeah.
I never attach jihad because I know what jihad is.
Yeah.
And it's a personal struggle and a personal sort of a personal thing. So as a way to not perpetuate the confusion.
Yeah.
I think the language is important. So I will say, they're like an ISIS, Al-Qaeda inspired group.
Well, you'd never hear Christian terrorism. Like, you never heard that term, Christian terrorism. So certain, let's say the KKK may have some sort of religious component to it, or other people that attack other groups in the name of their faith, but you'll never hear that term, Christian terrorism or Jewish terrorism, or, it seems to be a label that's bandied towards the Muslim community. And again, out of 2 billion people, a tiny fraction, but for whatever reason, the press, the headlines, the focus is on these extremists. Again, a lot of them mental health issues, radicalized, maybe online or however it's going to be, but again, a small representation. And again, these are people, even when you go from a religious standpoint, there's no religious evidences or proofs to support any of those acts of violence. And but it gets lost in the shuffle, and people somehow equate the religion with extremism.
Yeah, no, it's the IRA was only 75 guys that would pull triggers and plant bombs in the height of the troubles. It doesn't take a lot of people to.
Yeah.
But I think that's a very important distinction. And I think when you look at the research, when you look under the hood of what's going on in mental health and those aspects of it, you'll find similar traumas. You'll find the shame. Yeah. And it may manifest through the lens not of pride but of honor, or something, which is kind of the same thing. As the way of remedying what's going on inside, and you have the added complexity of the religious indoctrination that goes with it, that has to be undone. When I've spoken to professionals that are doing de-radicalizations with former ISIS, Al-Qaeda inspired people, there's that layer of theology that adds a layer of complexity to it. But I think that also exists on the white supremacy side, but not in theology, but some of the anti-Semitism and Holocaust denial, the nest of logic and facts that have been built over time, belief systems. Some of them have to be, picked apart, and it's not just they're complex narratives that have been installed over some time. I know it was with me. Holocaust denial was sort of the last piece that I had to deal with and take care of. Even having Jewish friends, but still having aspects of the Holocaust that I wasn't clear on, because those nested beliefs are tricky to get out. But when it comes down to it, I don't think there is any difference between an ISIS, Al-Qaeda inspired person, an extremist, or a neo-Nazi extremist, or a Marxist extremist, or Maoist, or whatever. I think that hurt people. Hurt people. Exactly. And the research shows that's not 100%, but certainly on the white supremacist side, the number one correlated factor in the history of somebody joining a violent extremist group is childhood trauma. Yeah. And then
seeking belonging, seeking brotherhood, seeking community, seeking belonging, seeking significance, seeking power.
So I truly believe that the level to which we dehumanize other human beings is a mere reflection of our own internal disconnection and dehumanization.
Yeah.
So the way to fix the external disconnection, dehumanization, is to fix the internal.
Yeah.
That person can accept themselves. That person can heal those
love
traumas.
and respect themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
then the other thing becomes alien.
Yeah.
Right?
There's no one to blame anymore. If you really love and respect yourself, then you don't need to project your inner weaknesses on other groups and other people.
Yeah, I have to say, you look at the big tattooed guy screaming and waving sticks and flags and stuff like that, and what I actually in my mind see, because of what I've learned, what I've experienced, and research and stuff like that, I see a wounded 4-year-old having a temper tantrum in a grown man's body.
Yeah.
It's disarming to look at them that way. But I also very cognizant there's probably nothing more dangerous than a wounded 4-year-old having a temper tantrum in a grown man's body. It's one level it's disarming. At the other level, it's not in any way trying to minimize the threat that can pose. But
and you and I were actually neighbors. We live in the same area, so I'm sure growing up, like, now kind of like you said, a former neo-Nazi and a Muslim and a Jewish rabbi, like we're all in the same neighborhood and kind of getting together, building these bonds of friendship and engagement, which again, taking the online siloed information that everyone's getting to physically meet is becoming less common, and it's much more needed. The work you're doing to engage groups, to tell your story, to share where the ideology is coming from and why, because a lot of people don't know, and they don't know why, from, let's say, even the Muslim communities, the other racial or religious groups, and even some people in the white community don't necessarily understand how these ideologies come and get such great support from even the highest levels of government. So a lot of respect for what you're doing and the work, and again, authenticity, going out there, taking the time, going to visit the groups, and keep doing it over years. So again, a lot of respect, our friendship, and getting to know you over the years. Now we're kind of working in a similar fashion on different fronts, but with same values, same understanding, that engagement, compassion, meeting one another, that courage aspect to go see people that wouldn't normally call you. It's not like the other groups are calling you. They're like, hey, I'm here to tell the story. And usually when somebody takes that step, like when you took the step, when you were at the synagogue, I think people came away like, I just saw the audience. There's respect, appreciation, compassion, that you came, you shared your story, you were vulnerable. That speaks volume, because that helps people heal.
Yeah, and what the message is really to those people is that it really wasn't about you.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with you.
Yeah.
It was my stuff.
Yeah.
I projected onto you. And I think that helps to, because I think to some degree it's a natural thing sometimes for victims to blame themselves for things.
Yeah.
So, but part of what I do is help them get rid of that, and often, it's difficult because it's there. I probably didn't say anything, like there's probably an individual I can't say, hey, I did this and this affected you, right? It's slander. It's interesting in Judaism. There's a couple of sins that can't be forgiven in the traditional way, and slander is one of them, because when you lie about someone, you can't. There's no way you can't. You have no idea how many people that affected.
Yeah.
Right. So you can't apologize for that.
Whereas backbiting could be about something that could be true, but slander is an outright falsehood that's being perpetrated as truth, which on the internet now, so much stuff. I'm sure you have the same thing. We don't know what to believe anymore. You watch the news, and so the slander is everyone's getting their fair share of slandered, and the only way to cut through it is personal engagement, and that's even becoming much less.
Yeah, especially in COVID,
Yeah, no kidding.
maintain
exactly
social distancing.
So I think in closing, Tony, again, great work. And I'm sure we're going to be doing more work and more engagement online and offline. And so thank you again for joining us, and looking forward to our future collaborations.
Absolutely.
Thanks a lot, man.
Take care.